Hi, welcome to Quirky Queen's Journals. My name's Kirsten. So today I'm just using paintbrushes and 3 colours of acrylic paint on the gel plate. So I have ultramarine blue, cadmium red, deep hue and lemon yellow. And I'm just using a variety of paintbrushes. I do use a colour shaper and a brayer briefly. So I'm really going in here with little intention except for to make sort of marks using the wet paintbrush, damp paintbrush, dry paintbrush. Also to kind of think of composition and sort of how these colours are, how I can make it work as a whole, basically. So I'm making the kind of secondary colours just now, green, orange and purple. The paintbrush it's been wetted and had a bit of a rub on the towel, but not too much. I'm using a very thin layer of paint as well because this is what will be topmost of the picture. Also, I'm laying colours on top of it, so I don't want to be waiting a long time for it to dry. I'm wanting the brush marks to show, so this is quite a stiff brush. This shape is a bit of a disaster. I soon go over it again. That's the beauty of the gel plate, is being able to sort of recover something and change it. So when I'm laying down these sort of shapes, I'm sort of starting more pressured at the start and becoming less pressured as it continues. So I kind of let it tail off a little bit itself. I'm just coming in with colour shaper on top, just to see if I can sort of spread it out a bit, though to be fair, it is kind of mostly dry. For all I'm making gestural marks, I am working fairly slowly because you still need to think about where you're putting them. So that's a little bit that came off the colour shaper. So I do let this layer dry. A lot of it I'm working just wet into wet, or it's drying by the time I come back to that area. So this is a flat, wider, softer brush. And I've made it quite wet to begin with. Now you can see the paint beading on the gel plate, but I'm covering quite a large area with this. And all these different marks are going to be at the top of the picture. So, we've got kind of stripy brush marks with, varying line thickness. And then we've got this kind of beading. So these will be quite dot-like. So now I'm using the palette knife, and this is going to be another variation of how to put the colour down. And it will also provide a sort of more defined representation of the colour, I suppose. Instead of it being spread out quite thinly, we're going to have these thicker areas. The other thing I'm doing is I'm trying to think of balance and also the composition as well. So we don't want everything symmetrical, I suppose, but at the same time we do need it to feel balanced, so we think about the visual weight. So if we have quite spread out paint with the when we used the wet paintbrush and created the beading, a smaller version of that on the opposite side, but more defined, will balance that. It's still something that I'm learning a lot about. I'm trying, but basically that's my understanding of it. So we're still sticking with the secondary colours as well, because then the primary colours are going to be more, oh, what's the word for it? I'm going to use the primary colours to kind of provide more of the structure of the composition, if that makes sense. Because the blue is going to be my darkest dark and the yellow is going to be my lightest light. I do love making purples. They're my favourite colour to make. That cadmium red deep hue is actually a mixture of nathanol crimson and nathanol red. I looked at the bottle ingredients. So I've been working a lot more on trying to become better at abstract art, trying to think more about using the elements of art as well to create the abstracts. And this is, I decided to have a shot on the gel plate because I find mark making on the gel plate offers a lot more opportunities than doing it on paper does. And also I'm really familiar with the gel plate. I like how it behaves. And I like that I'm working in reverse. So as I progress, you make bigger, faster strokes because you're less careful because the top's already been defined, but you still need to work with that. So later on, I'm lifting the gel plate up a lot to have a peek and see how it's been affected. So I'm just putting this tissue paper down to remove some of the thicker marks from the palette knife because I'm just conscious of drying time, and I find one of the things about sort of trying to be gestural, although I'm thinking about where I'm placing things and what type of mark I'm going to go next, I also want it to just kind of keep moving as well. So this is me coming in with the primary colours now, and what I'm doing is so we've already got shapes on the gel plate from the secondary colours, and I'm using these primary colours almost to fill in the gaps around them. And also to work out, that's a tiny little yellow mark, but if you think about it, on the right hand side, that's quite, all the attention's going to that yellow mark. So these two smaller marks on the left side, I'm just using to sort of balance it. The red shape's a bit odd, isn't it? But you just go with it. You just go what sort of feels right at the time. When you're looking at it and you think, what do you need to do to make it interesting and work? I do like curling colours around colours. And then when we come in with the blue, you'll see a big change, as in, I feel like this is the point where you start to see what it's going to be. You start to get an idea. This isn't like a formula to make abstract art. This is just the sort of formula I used on this one occasion. I've started using a limited palette a lot, and I really like it. I think it makes my job a lot easier, and I'm not having to worry about colours mixing together. Because there is only 3 of them, the variations should they should work together. This is all very experimental. This kind of gestural abstract art isn't something that I've done much of. I tend to base most of my abstract art on just kind of finding an interesting composition and balancing, sort of creating some sort of tidiness out of chaos. That's my thought processes on it anyway. So once I've finished using the primary colours, I'll repeat this process with the secondary colours. And I'll just keep building from there. So the end up of this picture as well, I really liked it, but I just wished it was a bit more off-centre than it ended up. But I really liked the variety of the marks, and something to help that was using the different paintbrushes, using the different levels of wetness on the paintbrushes as well. And with the shapes as well, once you've got a few down, you know, a lot of it's kind of mirroring what's there, as in, you know, the lines and the shapes that I'm creating are very similar to each other. They've just got different thicknesses, textures, the speed with which you put it on, the pressure with which you put it on. All those things add up to give variation. Another thing as well that I'm kind of trying to use is, you know, whether the area that I'm applying it to, the paint's already dried there, or if it's still got some wetness to it. So some areas will have a sort of sharper edge and some areas will have a more blended edge. But I'm really trying to not overthink it too much. And I think the fact that the top of the picture is actually underneath, so what I'm seeing just now isn't a true reflection of what it will be. I like that sort of air of mystery that it's given. And I like at this stage as well, I'm doing I'm kind of joining shapes together. And I'm also kind of trying to provide a bit of a framework round the outside. So like I said, the blues and the yellows are obviously the darkest and the lightest. So you've really got to remember that overall, value-wise, they are the sort of star of the show, and you're really wanting to support them and not try and fight with them. That's my thought process. I'm not saying that that's an actual, that's actually a right or wrong way to think. So here I am using a dry paintbrush, and what I'm doing is I'm just kind of, areas where it's a bit thicker, I'm just brushing it out. Also, I'm wiping that paintbrush off sort of between colours so that I'm not overly blending it. It's just that bit's edited out. I like what's happening in the sort of top right between the yellow, green and blue there. There's a feeling of movement. So in my mind at the moment, the top right is looking like the kind of focal point area, but we still need the other areas to be of interest as well, so that you move around the painting. So the dry brush marks that are quite evident in the sort of top middle right, I'm using them in other areas as well, just to bring them together and keep a sort of story going around the picture. So at this stage we have got quite a lot of paint build up on certain areas of the gel plate, and I have to do a bit of looking in the back just to check, you know, how that what's going on at this stage is affecting the top layer of the picture. So I must have decided that I had too much blue in the bottom right, because I rubbed some of that off with one of the silicone wedge tools, and I'm adding little bits of blue in other areas. I generally hold it up to a window to see through the back of the gel plate, as it's quite, my plate's quite stained with all the things that I put it through. So this is quite a wet paintbrush again, and also it's a different paintbrush. I did find that when I was wanting to cover larger areas, that's when I tended to use the wetter paintbrush. I'm just putting a little bit of red into that yellow-green just to mute it down a bit. It just makes it less vibrant, so although there's a lot of yellow in it, it won't fight as much with the yellow that's up at the, you know, the line of yellow up the right hand side. I generally find if I'm doing a larger area that I do tend to use a colour that demands less attention. Wasn't keen on this shape. I've created like circles here, and actually that shows up at the end as well, because I feel overall the end it did look like two eyes at the top. But this was the first time that I've done something like this, so I thought I did pretty good actually for my first time just letting loose on the gel plate like this. So I'm using quite a bright purple here, and that is going to help bring attention to that yellow line and keep the focal point up in that top right hand side. I think it was pretty wet, so I just removed some of it. The other thing is when I'm painting on here, especially when I'm going over areas where there's wet paint, I'm almost trying to paint on top of it rather than sort of into the paint that's there, if that makes sense. So that I'm just putting a layer over the top like you would put jam over butter, instead of trying to mix them together. So we need to bring a bit of lightness back in, don't we? Because it's got very dark with those purples. Oh, this, I thought to myself, what have you done when I covered this large area with this? But that actually turned out really nice on the final print. And I think it has, even though it's just on the outside, I think it's brought a lot of light back into that picture. And again, all the yellow in it is kind of enhancing the yellow line. So at this stage, I'm just kind of filling up the gel plate. You know, the spaces that haven't got any paint on them, but still trying to maintain an interesting composition, kind of work with what's there already so that I don't lose it, and all I'm doing is adding to it to hopefully make it better. I have tried this a couple of other times since I did this one, and I tried to be more blended with it, and I didn't like the results. I'll put them on at the end for you, but I just felt that they looked very flat and uninteresting, and I do think that you definitely need to be quite flamboyant on the gel plate, because a lot of this is getting hidden behind what's came before, so I wouldn't be scared of it. I think that's what happened. I tried too hard the next two times that I did it, and it just was very boring. I do notice that as this is progressing as well, that although I'm taking a fair bit of time to decide where I want to put a paint colour, what paint colour, etc., that when I do start making the mark, I am quite speedy at putting it on, because I've been making loads of these movements already So therefore they become a bit more natural to me. So this is me starting to add in the sort of primary colours again, just to sort of build the structure back up again, and then I do let this dry somewhat, and I'll have a look at the back and see, because for all these are kind of separate shapes, they still need to all work together and kind of almost flow into each other. That's what I feel anyway. It's hard to know if there's right or wrong ways, or if there's just the person's own thought processes when it comes to abstract art. Abstract art's very, it's like a closed world that you don't get told things about. You get told things about certain things. So this area here in the middle is kind of sparse, you can see that, but it's also sitting there separate from everything. And so what I'm doing is I'm using quite muted colours to bring it into the, you know, the other shapes more. Clearly put in far too much water there, or I needed to remove some of it. But anyway, I'm going to use quite muted colours and then just bring it in to the other shapes. But I'm using muted colours so that it doesn't detract from the other shapes, if that makes sense. But you still need to have some of the textures, some of the brush marks, all the things that are in the others areas. I wonder if abstract art is very much, it's something to do with the person themselves and they decide what's right and wrong. I need a manual that says, this thought process is correct, Kirsten, this one is wrong. I can't believe I just used my own name. So what I'm doing here is I kind of like adding lines in. And so this is just a wet rigger brush that you use in watercolours. And all I'm doing is putting some watery lines down. And I'm kind of having it so everything's going up towards the right. I don't even know why, it just feels like the right thing to do. And then I'm going to put some tissue paper on it. So these wet areas, well, the very wet areas, because I don't press very hard, we'll take some of that paint off. So we are at the kind of finishing stage where I just keep checking to make sure that it looks balanced and make sure that, you know, my darks and my lights are in places that I want them to be in. I think I do add more darks here. Yeah, I do. I think that did cause me a lot of problems, that bit in the middle. Oh, I make a kind of block shape here. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't overly show through. The yellow will only show through in tiny gaps in the brushwork, etc. But I clearly felt it needed it. It kind of looks like some sort of old computer game type Pac-Man type thing. Fortunately, this is at the back and you don't really see it. So the last thing I do after this is I kind of almost put kind of washes of colour over it, just so that everywhere on the gel plate is covered. So it's quite wet, the paintbrush, quite big movements. This is a soft paintbrush. You can see there, that's quite a grey colour. I'm kind of, I suppose I'm wanting darks, but I'm not wanting attention grabbing darks. It's hard to know whether or not this made a difference or not. I think it did. Suppose it made me feel like it was finished. I'm trying to work out if I'm mimicking the colours that are there already or if I'm actually putting like darks over lights or lights over dark. I think I'm just creating a new layer entirely. You need to remember most of this is, you know, mostly dry underneath. And there's multiple layers. And after this, we let it dry completely. And I left it for about an hour before we put on some white paint to pull it with. You can see the colours are looking just a bit muddy now, can't you? I don't think they were muddy before. So this is it dry. Now I put out far too much white paint, it kind of just came pouring out. But I do have a tendency to not put on enough for these big multi-layer gel print pulls. So I suppose too much was better than not enough. And I just keep rolling it off. But at least I've got full coverage. So there we go. That's about 3 minutes later. And a lot of rolling off. And I'm using 300 GSM watercolour paper that's smooth on one side. And I'm using the smooth side. That's me just having a peek. And then now I'm going to take it off. So we got most of it. There is some white patches on the paper from what's been left behind in the gel plate, but mostly we got a good pull. I probably could have left it for longer, but the anticipation kills me. So for all that looked really quite blended, at the end we've got a lot of the brush marks, which I really like. And these are the two that didn't work out so well. But do you know, I feel like it's something that I'm going to look into more anyway. So I hope you enjoyed, and thanks very much for watching, and take care, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.